Hey folks, Coach Patrick here, Endurance Nation, back with another live Friday meeting where I talk to you about topics related to endurance and planning and strategy for athletes who ride, who run, who swim, who hike, who whatever it is. If it's endurance related, we do it here inside Endurance Nation. And this 15-minute series is an opportunity for me to share out some of my learnings and connect with you around topics that are relevant to you as well. You have a chance here inside the space to chat your comments and connect. Sometimes people on the team like to show up and give me a hard time. Sometimes people just want to ask a genuine question. Even if it's not related to the topic that I'll be presenting on today, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll come back to it later, okay? So today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about setting priorities. Now, we talk a great deal inside Endurance Nation about return on investment. Most people understand what return on investment or ROI means when they think about purchasing like a house, or even better, how about doing a renovation on a house, right? We could renovate our bathroom. That's a high ROI area, right? Better bathroom or better kitchen, even better yet, a kitchen. But like renovating a closet, like probably not a big return on investment. Maybe important to you, but not something we're going to get a lot out of overall in terms of return on our investment inside the house, right? Anyway, I'm not even sure how you and I got married in the first place. We ended up owning this house, but still, that's the story for another day. So when you think about training, it's very, very similar. We want to invest our time in places where we know we're going to get a maximum return. And that has different implications across our season, depending on the proximity to our race and the proximity of the work we're doing. There's different levels of priorities that need to go into each sport. And that's part of what you have a coach for. A coach will help you sort of parse through all the things that you need to do, make sure you're on track, and then help you dial into what areas you need to be, right? So for example, inside Endurance Nation, in the wintertime, we tell you really don't swim. I'm not worried about it. Don't swim. I don't think it's a high ROI winter activity unless you are really, really bad at swimming, or swimming is the only social thing that you get to do. Then you could probably swim. We have means for you to swim inside the team, but I'm not recommending you swim, because swimming in January before your August race has very little implications. Now, swimming in open water in the last 4 to 5 weeks before your race and doing so frequently, super high return on investment. And I really want you to get into that water. And that's very important to me at that time. But it's not important to me now in January, not just the open water thing, just swimming in general, right? Similarly speaking, when we talk about body composition, let's look at that as an example. When people say they want to lose a few pounds because they're carrying some extra weight for whatever reason, it happens to all of us, then they want to lose that weight. So they got a strategy or a plan they hatch that they want to lose that weight. Well, doing so in those last 5 weeks, the swim time we were just talking about, that's a very low return on investment activity, because it's going to inhibit your ability to do all the workouts you need to do. It's going to mess up your taper. In general, it's going to be basically a monkey wrench inside all the work that you're doing, this finely tuned machine that you've built for months and months. And then all of a sudden you decide to completely complicate things, like naturally, right? And throw this body composition wrench in. You're going to, put a plastic bag over your torso like a high school wrestler, jump on the, exercise bike and like sweat, and try and lose weight. Super bad idea. If you want to address body composition, further away from your race and the longer time frame we have to do it, the better. Because longer time frames, you could lose half a pound a month, and you would lose 6 pounds by the time you get to race day. That's awesome. If you've got 3 weeks to lose 6 pounds, that's 2 pounds a week. That's not easy. It's not good. It's not going to lead you to make good decisions, right? So cramming that type of work into a short time frame is really not so great. So for me, think about that. Hey, Janine, how are you? Good to see you. Thanks for dropping by. So when we think about setting priorities for you, the proactive, super smart, tuning in on a Friday afternoon athlete, we need to think a little bit about not only that time constraint that I talked about, distance to event or distance to performance or outcome, but we also need to think about the access that you have to things now. Okay. So for example, right now in the middle of a pandemic, and for many of us, we can't access our pools, whether it's simply because they're closed or because the system as the way it has been set up is just not great in terms of your schedule and so on, or just maybe life is in the way. In that case, you may have a swim goal, but doing it right now, not tenable, right? So we start with where we are. So take a look at your setup and see what you've got going on, right? So we take a look at our setup, see what you have, and then commensurately, we take a look at our season and say, what are the priority goals that I have? And the intersection of those two places is where we find opportunity, okay? So back in the day when we didn't have a pandemic to worry about or other challenging constraints, if you told me, hey, coach, I can't do a lot of riding in the winter. I don't like the indoor trainer, but I still want to be successful at this Ironman race. I know that you've got volume that you need to get into your body as a cyclist. But if you're unable to, or unwilling to, or just not that interested in doing all that volume early in the season, we can leverage a training camp or an event a little bit later in the season, 8 to 12 weeks out from your race, maybe 16, depending, where we can put a lot of volume into your system and get you ready for the race by ramping up a slightly more intense type schedule, right? Not intensive volume, but intensive how we're sort of packing the volume together. Well, we don't really have access to that right now because you can't just go off to any old training camp. Spots are limited, hard to get to. You may not be vaccinated. You may not want to travel. So all of that comes into play in terms of what we have. So it's really important that we're taking sort of those longer season goals that we have and we're interfacing them with what opportunities we have now within our control. And it's never been more relevant than it has been now. So I thought I'd just walk you through 2 or 3 scenarios for athletes to give you a sense of how I think through the process of prioritizing and then answer any questions that you might have as well. So a great one that we have right now, we have a lot of ultra runners on the team. We have ultra runners who are former triathletes who are ultra runners. We have people who are currently triathletes, but who are ultra running this season. We have people who are just straight up ultra runners and just run all day long. And so for those athletes, they have a different set of criteria that they're trying to hit in terms of getting ready for the race. And ultra is a huge swath. It's like saying triathlon. An ultra could be 50K and it could be up to 200 miles. And that's a big delta between those two ends of the spectrum. But for athletes who fall in that ultra running space, fitness is really, really important, as is durability. And there's specific goals that they have with their race. So priorities for ultra runners typically happen on 2 axes, right? The first axis is the distance. How far do I need to go, right? Am I going 200 miles? That's a multi-day event. Am I going 50K? That's just a little more than a marathon. Okay. So understanding what that event is determines how much endurance they need to have. The other axis, which is really important, is how challenging that specific race is. And the metric that we use here inside the team is elevation gain. So if you're doing a 50K and it's only got 1,000 feet of elevation gain, not super worried about it. If you're doing a 50 miler and it has 10,000 feet of elevation gain, now I'm super worried because that means a very technical and challenging course. And so for athletes that fall into that axis who are very high on the challenge scale, regardless of the distance, they're seeking to address the technical challenges of the race that they've entered. Right. And this is sort of a different conversation we'd have with a beginner who's just doing a great deal of learning, and so if you're a beginner who's looking at this, definitely reach out, talk to me here on Facebook or inside the team, drive by, use the chat button, and I'll talk you through some of the process of how we handle to answer the basic questions that you have. But in this case, you've got someone who's trying to solve the technical side of their sport, but they've got constraints around them, right? So you may perhaps be signed up for a very hilly ultra running race, but guess what? You don't have mountains in the background. Maybe you have Watopia, like I do right here, but you don't have mountains in the background. So you can't just go out and run up and down mountains in preparation for your elevation gain. That's the most common challenge ultra runners have. Another easy one that ultra runners have is the overnight running piece, right? It's very hard to create conditions in your life to go out and do a challenging overnight run on your own, unsupported, etc. You can maybe do it once or twice a year. Maybe you can trick someone else into doing it with you or whatever it may be. So that becomes really challenging to kind of replicate the nuances of the event in that regard. So we have to find ways to adapt given our current situation to address this training strategy. And for someone who's got a very hilly race, the longer the race, the earlier we need to start working on preparing your body to handle this challenge. So for someone in this case who's doing an ultra running race who's like 6 months away, we can do a good deal of work at home with plyometrics and even perhaps even some weights, dumbbells, etc., to strengthen the body to prepare for the hills. It's still winter time here in North America, so we've got to be very mindful of keeping you healthy and obviously understanding that in your particular situation, you don't have necessarily hills around you. So we can be creative with that. And in those cases, we would start off by doing the exercises themselves. That's easy, 4 to 6 weeks. Then we would move to a phase where we would start doing those exercises after your run workouts. You go out, do an easy 5 or 6 miler, super easy ultra pace. Then you come back and do the weights, right? So we've now added a degree of difficulty because we've got fatigue in your body from the run. And now we're gonna do the weights. That gets us another 5 or 6 weeks. We're 3 months into your 6-month training block. You've been getting stronger and more durable. Now's the time when we start saying, how do we attack this to start building in some elevation? And then we have options, right? At that point in time, we've had 3 months to figure out where's a hill we can get to near you, or where's a building that we can get to. Or is there another event that we can sign up for that gives us the opportunity to practice some of the hill climbing stuff, right? Not just from a fitness standpoint, but also the skills and techniques related in ultra running to running up and downhill safely and efficiently. Okay, that's an easy way to think about priorities. So right now the priority would be important, but the action would be low because we were just doing internal work here, at the house or at the gym or plyometrically, in your garage, whatever, maybe with a box, just to kind of do that baseline work. So it's important, but it doesn't take a great deal of your time, not as much as just say running. Okay. Another example would be someone who's signed up for a triathlon. Let's just go the full distance. We'll go for the Ironman distance. And in this case, this is an athlete who has shown up, who just is not very strong on the bike at all. So they're a runner. Typical path for runners to triathlon is they show up because they just couldn't run anymore. They had an injury or a problem or setback. Or maybe one of their friends tricked them, and all of a sudden they're in the space where they're doing triathlon, and they've got a running baseline that they get, but they don't have the bike fitness that they need. And either they've already done a race inside Endurance Nation. Most people have come here after they've done a race or two, and they're like, probably could use a little bit of advice shortening the learning curve here, which is what we specialize at. And so in that case, we try and work with them here on solving this bike problem. And there's different levels of priorities that we have relative to the race. In this case, we're talking about someone who's relatively new to the sport. So top priority for us in terms of distance and time of the race is making sure that their bike setup is solid, right? They have the bike that they're going to be racing on. If they're changing, we need to get that sorted out. And if they have that bike, then making sure they're well fit on that bike. I'm not a professional bike fitter, but we can definitely give you some baseline guidance and make sure you're good. And even other people on the team can recommend a bike fitter to you. So those are top priorities for me. They're not necessarily top priorities for the athletes because they're like, I need to ride. But I want to make sure from a coach perspective that I've solved the fit and infrastructure issues related to the bike so that athletes can go out and train and we're not going to have any interruptions or problems as you go through the process of it, right? The next step in terms of priorities for someone who's training for their first Ironman, when we think about the bike, is making sure that they're really good at doing intervals. And that's important for us here inside Endurance Nation because we use intervals to control intensity and we use intervals to develop not just physical strength, but also mental strength as well. And being successful at the Ironman distance requires both mental clarity and mental strength. And those can be developed indoors through the winter with intervals. We challenge you with the weekday intervals, and then you get to go have fun on the weekends, whether it's still riding in Zwift or Watopia behind me or doing your own aerobic activity work outside. But those are really important elements for us to set the tone for how we train with our methodology. Now, as we move through the season, then it's time to start bringing in some incremental volume. And we work the volume in sort of in a sneaky way. We start off by saying, instead of just going to a big long ride on a single weekend day, we'll put those two rides back to back. We'll do a Saturday ride and a Sunday ride. For some people, it may be a Friday, Saturday, depending on your situation. And we put those two workouts together. So we show up on that second day with fatigue from the first day. And so I'm creating adaptation by having you show up a little tired. And I do it very slowly in that regard. So we get a chance to kind of build some familiarity. It gives us a chance to change the nutrition in a low stakes way. It gives us a chance to identify problems with your bike fit or comfort level that we can address very easily in the first week or so, 2 or 3 weeks. And then we start to compress those 2 days into one. So I get to solve that priority problem of adding fitness to the bike in terms of a volume perspective by doing it deliberately across the season. But the top priority is making sure that the infrastructure is right for these new athletes, that they've got their fit dialed in, that they know what they need to do in terms of nutrition, et cetera, self-care. And then we work them through the process of getting them up and running. Now, of course, when athletes show up and when you also show up, and this is where I'm going to ask you to kind of reach back and kind of grab that ego and pull that out and just say, yeah, from an ego perspective, when we sign up for an Ironman, we don't think about like, yeah, I really need to get my bike fit right. Really got to make sure that I have enough gels, bars, ooze, potatoes, whatever you eat, right? That's not what you're thinking. What are you thinking? You're thinking, I'm going to be in the aero bars and I'm going to be flying down the road at like so many miles an hour, kilometers, if that's your thing. I'm going to be so fast that I'm going to ride insert the time that is a super fast time for you. That's what you're thinking about. And you want to go out and you want to ride long and you want to ride fast. Those are important to have, and that's important from a motivation perspective. But at the same time, we need to balance that energy out with the step-by-step priorities that are going to allow you to achieve that goal by starting off in the right place. And this is important not just for the beginner athlete that I mentioned just now for the triathlon example, but also for all of us. We as athletes go through an annual cycle, and every year, just a couple of things, we lose a couple of things that we just forgot. We learned it last year, or maybe we learned it many, many years ago. We show up this year and we forgot. Easy examples like that are, running shoes. You still have them from last year. They may be too old. Time to check that out, right? Cycling equipment. Maybe at the end of last season, you didn't swap out the chain and the cassette. So now you're riding and you're kind of getting back into it. Now you get all these problems with it, right? Or even with the swimming side. You were swimming last year. You took part of the winter off. Now you jump back in the pool to go do your first workout at 4,000 yards. And you can barely move your shoulders the next day. Right. So having priorities is important because it allows us to set goals that are relevant to where you are now. So we don't make those mistakes in terms of missing up on our gear selection. We don't overreach with our training because we've identified what the priorities are, and we can start off with that process. It gives you focus, it gives you direction, and more importantly, it allows you to start building all of those pieces across the board incrementally as we get to the race. And ultimately, as we get closer to the race, our goal, right, is to have you show up 12 weeks out from the race, 100% ready to train for the race. All the equipment's dialed in. You are healthy. Your body composition, pretty darn close, right? You have probably a practice race or a volume thing or a camp or who knows what you got lined up there. All that's dialed in. There's no, I wonder what happens when I run more than 4 hours, right? Because you've done it, right? There's no like, I wonder if I should put aero bars on my bike or not, because we solved it, because all that was an early season priority. So as you think about your year as a self-coached athlete, or whether you're on the team here or not, really step back and say, what are my broader goals for the year? And then what are my priorities related to those goals based on the resources that I have at my disposal now, right? If someone's going to show up in a month, if you know that the shoe fairy comes in a month, you don't have to worry about it now because the shoe fairy is coming next month, because I guess February is International Shoe Fairy Month. Who knew? I certainly hope the fairy shows up to my house because I could use some new shoes. But look at the resources you have now, and let's tie those pieces together. As you continue your journey as a self-coached athlete, I encourage you to not only look online, but check out Endurance Nation. We're online at endurancestation.us. Google us, Google Endurance Nation, and the topic that you're looking for endurance. We've written about it, talked about it, podcasted about it, and coached it as well. We're happy to help you out and get you ready to rock for the next season. This year for 2021 will be a super interesting year, but we're very excited as a team to get together, hopefully meet up with one another again, and have some super fun at our races as we go across the entire season. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another presentation for every Friday at noon for sure. And I believe next week as well, I'm also doing a Wednesday night roundtable. If you're interested in attending that Wednesday night roundtable, I do recommend it for athletes who are not on the team. You can learn more by going to endurancestation.us. You can see the live tab at the top of the website, and you'll get information about the event and learn how you can RSVP and make sure that you're in, and we'll have a chance to connect in a smaller, more group-like setting to talk about season planning goals. All right. Thanks, folks. Take care. I'll talk to you guys soon. Have a fantastic weekend.